seemed really simple at the time that took a while to understand. I was having a problem with foundation, and I said, George, they don't understand. I'm trying to tell them they don't understand. George said, no, it's not that they don't understand, it's that they don't want to understand. Well, that's a lesson you can use your whole life. One of the most profound things George ever told me, he said, in order to have a great festival, you have to learn the economics of creativity. I'm a kid running around in Africa with B.B. King. He said, because to have a great festival, you have to have longevity. If you don't master the economics of creativity, you'll do something once, it'll be big, it'll lose money, and it won't have longevity. To have longevity, you have to master the economics of creativity. And that took me years to understand, but that was George.
And that concept, the notion of the economics of creativity and the fact that you have to, that the festival cannot lose money in order to continue, I mean, that certainly guided some of the decisions that have been made about this festival over the years. I mean, just the introduction of corporate sponsorships and some of the VIP stuff. You know, the festival has to gross more than it spends in order to continue happening. And that was, like you said, I mean, I'm guessing you as kind of the hippie idealist early on, that took a while for you to come to grips with, but George understood that concept.
Yeah, but he couldn't learn from a better. George understood what a bottom line was, how to make it, and how to work to it. And that's something that I was fortunate enough to learn. Yeah, when you set out to start a festival, like we get a lot of calls to start a festival, you have, you know, like an artistic architecture and a financial architecture. And you have to put those together and make them both work. We did the last interview and together, the last time we did this, and a guy came up and he said, well, since you started having these other bands, how much do you think you compromised the festival? And I'm like, I don't think we compromised the festival. George is 85, excuse me. He's leaning over and he says, in order to have a festival, you have to have people. Because he had James Brown at Newport to help guide the way.
Right. Yeah, and a festival is a living thing. It's going to change, it's going to grow, it's going to evolve. I mean, George had a front row seat when Bob Dylan plugged in and played Went Electric at the Newport Folk Festival. He was standing on the side of the stage when that happened and had to deal with that fallout, I guess.
Yeah, that was a surprise. I mean, conceptually, to everybody. Yeah, I mean, you think this festival has been going for 50 years, the changes in society, the changes in economics, the changes in ticket prices, the changes in just in society. So for a festival to remain meaningful, you know, never mind successful, but to remain relevant through all these different changes and all these different years is something that George was able to do.
Absolutely. I mean, he was still coming to the festival in 2019. I mean, he was still at, what, 94, 93, 94 at that time. He was still here, still involved.
Yeah.
How hands-on was he in those later years? Because obviously at a certain point, you became sort of the primary hands-on producer of Jazz Fest, but George was always involved. I mean, how did his role change in recent decades?
It was just kind of a natural evolution, really. I mean, he was still, look, when we started, we had no idea what a festival was. He brought down a team. Arnold London at the tickets. Marie St. Louis booked talent. I never booked any talent. Bob Jones ran the stage. His Newport Core. And then as we started to have this little festival and started to grow, George was looking at what we were doing. He was looking at the economics, like you said, the bottom line, and it just started to grow and grow. But he would always stay. I mean, in these later years, I would go up and see George at least once a month.
Go see him once a month in New York.
Yeah, at least once a month. And I'd go up there and he'd say, well, I don't want to give you advice. I'm like, George, that's what I'm here for. What are you talking about? That's why I came. And then he would, you know, say something really simple, like you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do the festival in 21, you should wait till 22. So George was, for me, was always there as a guiding light.
When he advised you not to plan a festival for 2021, you didn't listen to that advice?
No, I was like, George, we can do that. We can do that. You know, we got to do it. Well, we didn't. We'd already canceled you know, the festival in 2020, and we didn't in April, then we'd gone by April of 2021, so we didn't really want to come out of 2021 not having a festival for 2 years. And so we put this October thing together, and then Delta came along, and as it turned out, George's advice was to wait till 22.
Well, amongst other problems, had you had the festival in the fall, it would have gotten dark sooner, so you'd have had to end earlier, and soft-shell crabs aren't in season, so that would have been a problem.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you can't do a fall jazz fest. It makes no sense.
That was something that I didn't see till later. That even though daylight savings was in, when you get to October, it's so far along in the year that the sun sets at 6:30, not 7:30. So then, we're going to have to end an hour earlier. We're going to lose an hour on the stage. We're going to lose an hour of the festival. You know, what do we have to do to survive? And then we didn't have to do it. Yeah, and then a lot of the food was obviously, it wasn't crawfish season in October. I mean, what are you going to do? We got 40 things with crawfish in them.
Crawfish Monica with just noodles. It's not the same. Just a Monica part. Yeah, just Monica. Let's have a bowl of Monica. Going back, just talk about George personally. Like you said, his late wife Joyce was an African-American woman. He was progressive, I think, in a lot of ways. I spoke with Darlene Chan, who, like you, was recruited as a young woman. She was a young woman. He recruited her out in Berkeley to work in the festival office out west. But she's talked about how, you know, back in those days, the late 60s, early 70s, when it was very much the Mad Men TV show and women didn't necessarily get a lot of respect in the professional world, he treated her just like everybody else, that he saw her as a capable person regardless of the fact that she was a woman, and he kind of threw her in the deep end as well. So did you see that in him, that's kind of progressive views that he had about people and personnel?
Yeah, well, Darlene is here today, and even though she's so much younger than me, she was actually working with George before I was. She worked with George 53 years or 54 years, because when I first got there, she was my boss. And when George had to move the festival to New York City after the riot, man, he had a week in Carnegie Hall and a week in Lincoln Center. Carnegie Hall that first year, there was like, I don't know, 29 shows, because there was one show in the afternoon and 2 shows at night. And Carnegie Hall with the union is one of the hardest halls to work in the world. Darlene Chan was running it. And I was sent in there to work with her. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is another level. But yeah, George, you know, he respected everything. You know, I was just everybody, but he didn't see that. He didn't see young, he didn't see color, he didn't see education, obviously, because he hired me. Yeah, he was always like that. But he lived in the world of musicians, and he was a magician and a musician, both. So, you know, that was his perspective.
Talk about, yeah, education. Like you said, you were kind of floundering at Tulane back when he first found you. The early years of Jazz Fest, the festival lost money, so at some point he had to go get a line of credit, I believe it was, from the bank, and ask your father, the architect, to sign that line of credit. And one of his pitches, was it not, that your dad said to George, hey, or George said to your dad, I've given your son a purpose in life, so maybe you can help me out and sign this loan. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's true. The first couple of years, George didn't know who my dad was, right? So then the festival lost enough money not to keep going. And so he went to my dad. My dad said, you know, well, I was in and out of college a number of times. And my dad, who, you know, graduated from Harvard, one of the great architects, telling him that I was dropping out of school to live in a green station wagon with Professor Longhair was a big cultural curve, okay? But what he said to George, where you were telling, he says, I think you found something for my son to do. And so he signed the note at the bank.
You know, and George, in those early years, from what I understand, kind of put his foot down in terms of the shape of this festival, because early on, when it was losing money, there was some talk the board wanted to do away with the outdoor segment of the festival and just do concerts at the Municipal Auditorium and other venues. They thought that the Heritage Fair, the outdoor part of this festival, didn't have a future, it was a money loser. But George obviously saw the future and said no.
You know, it's an amazing thing that there's a movie, a film called Jazz Fest: A New Orleans Story. It's a full-length movie. It's going to premiere in New York and LA on May 13th and then go to theaters around the country. And it really has a lot of the, they found this documentary footage of the creation of the festival, George's first time, you know, with Mahalia Jackson in the square. But, so the festival was in Congo Square, 70, 71. 72, we're moving out, and so there's a piece of documentary of film in this thing. George is standing out in the fairgrounds. There's like part of a tent, nothing there. And he says, we're going to create a festival the whole world's going to come to.
And he was right.
And there was nothing. He said, we're going to have this great New Orleans culture, the gospel and the blues and everything. So George was the kind of guy that could, you know, sort of see around corners. He was a visionary.
And he knew that seats, you know, a seated festival, which they did at the early part, in the early years of the Newport Jazz Festival, it was a seated audience outside. But he knew that, post Woodstock, that the audience wanted to move around. The audience didn't want to be seated, confined to seats at these outdoor shows. So hence you don't have seats outside here at the fairgrounds.
You know, this form, this structure of a multi-stage outdoor music and food and art festival was a new form in 1970, 1972 when we got here. And like I said, it kind of grew out of the Newport Folk Festival. They had, you know, little stages like this big with Bob Dylan on it. But he had all this roots music. And so he just had this idea, we'll go out to the fairgrounds, we're gonna have, and he said, you're gonna have 6 hours of music all day for $2. George, don't say that, they still think it should be $2. But you're right, Keith, this was his vision. And we were doing nighttime shows, you know, for years and years. And some great, at UNO with Aretha and the Gospel Soul Children. And then finally George said, well, we realized in doing something at night, we were competing with local promoters and with local clubs. George said, look, this is enough. This is enough. Let's stop doing nighttime concerts. We'll just do the festival and let the city grow. And that was as much a defining part of this George Festival thing as anything else. Because with this festival ending at 7, you know, being a daylight festival, if we went to 2 or 3 in the morning like a rock fest, which we could, you know, it would eliminate that scene at night. But because we end in the day, you have this like funk Olympics going on in New Orleans at night. You know, it's a big week for the restaurants, a big week for the clubs. And the nighttime scene in New Orleans during Jazz Fest is a big part of the festival experience. And that really is happening because we stop early and don't do night shows.
And so, again, that was George. And I know y'all had some trouble with some of those night shows because there was so much competition. I mean, you weren't selling tickets for a lot of them. But I mean, that's George, again, recognizing the bottom line of the thing as well as the bigger picture of what was going on in the city. It didn't make sense on any level to keep doing those night shows.
Well, no, the night shows were paying for the fair.
Were they?
Yeah, like when we started having, you know, acts like B.B. King and Santana, Paul Simon, we would have them play the night and the fair, the night and the fair. The fair couldn't really afford them, so we'd shovel all the money. We'd go there, make a deal, play the night, and play that fair thing, and put most of the money on the night show, and then we could have them, you know, at the fair for the budgets that we had. Yeah, so the night shows, you know, went through a great evolution. We had, I don't know how many years on steamer, a side wheel, paddle boat, riverboat, paddle boat.
President.
Yeah, Art Deco ballroom steamer for years. So there was some great, remember Sun Ra parade.
Oh yeah, that was great.
With everyone chanting the spaces to play, spaces to play.
That was fucking great.
Ernie Cato before James Brown, Ernie Cato was convinced he was the real James Brown. Jumped off the stage and started running on the chairs, not through the chairs. So I remember that too. Nighttime concerts, like I say, just got to the point where he said, let's just do the fair.
So his voice was one that you listened to, with the exception of trying to put on a 2021 festival. I mean, you never thought you knew more than George. You always kind of took his advice as something that you needed to listen to.
I still don't.
So I don't think you know more than George.
No, no way. Like I said, George was brilliant and he was wise. And like I said, that's not always the same thing. To be smart, to be good at business, but also to have wisdom and vision. I listened to George all the time. And a lot of times I didn't have any choice because he was my boss. He was telling me what to do. But I always soaked it up for sure. No, I loved him. Like I say, we never had a problem.
Is it a little weird then, going into this festival as the first one without him? I mean, without him being alive anymore? Do you sense that absence as this festival gets underway?
No, not really. I mean, I sense him not being here because he tried to keep coming every year into his 90s, you know. And he was slowing down, he was on the golf cart, he would help him up on stage. I mean, George never got old, mentally, never. And he always stayed progressive. I mean, people think, well, George does this old jazz. No, George wanted to do everything and anything. He wanted to hear, what's this sound? What does this sound like? What's that? So he wasn't just going to the main acts. So he was here and, you know, going around and being at the festival. So now he's not here at the festival. But it's his spirit is here. It's his creation.
And that will never change. He'll always be a part of this festival. Today, I believe it's today, you're unveiling the totem in the Ancestors area at the back of the Congo Square Field later on today, right?
Yeah, we will have a jazz funeral for George. We have a lot of, this is a George-centric festival this year. There'll be a 30-foot unveiling painting on the grandstand window, so he's overlooking the festival. His band will play next week. His band will be in a seminar like this. But we will have a jazz funeral for George here both weeks, which we've never done before. But we want everybody that comes to experience George's jazz funeral. And then at the end, like you said, 2:25 today, this beautiful, beautiful, bigger-than-life painting of George and a statue will be unveiled in the field, and so George will always be here.
All right, that's awesome.
Yeah.
We've just got a couple minutes left. I don't know if anybody had any questions. I don't know if there's a mic out there even, so if you have one, maybe just stand up and shout, but we'll just, you know.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, sir.
First of all, I've been to 33 of these things, so God bless George and Allison Miner and you for what you've done here. Second, the question is, you're talking about how George mentored you, and I'm wondering if there is someone that you have taken under your wing to, you know, you're my age, and so is there someone you have taken under your wing to mentor to carry this thing forward?
Oh, well, look, our organization, I mean, now I'm not doing all the things that I used to do. If we have 30 or 40 people in the company, 25 of them at least, we've been together for 25 years to 30 years. And they have all taken on things that I used to do. And they can produce this festival without me, I think. Maybe not exactly the same, but no, but they've all grown up in it, and they're brilliant, brilliant people. Booking the talent, designing and building the field, legal, ticket operation. You know, there was a time when we moved out of our first office and I went to look at the files, and I looked in at the files and I was looking at PR, talent, this, and it was all my handwriting. I was like, whoa, I guess we weren't doing very much. But that's how it started. And now there's this whole team of people that are really putting this festival on. I still stay with the talent because music was, you know, what God powers me. If I went into this festival, like you say, started to get involved with the business end, but I never was going to leave the music. So I've stayed with that. I have 3 or 4 people, Darlene is one of them, that I work with and book the talent. But I don't think there will be one person if I'm not around. I think it'll be 2 or 3 or 4 of these people working together to do this festival.
All right, so there you have it. You don't have a Quint Davis like George had a Quint Davis coming by. You got a team, so which makes sense because now it's not invested in any one person.
When we do these jazz funerals, one of the things that we do, because there's so many people out there, you can't see the brass band, you can't see the funeral, and we take pictures. That Gina? We take Gina. We take pictures all through George's life. We put them on a board, and we put them on a pole that you hold up, and it's got ribbon on the pole. So as the jazz funeral comes across the field, you'll see these pictures of George in the air coming over. So I had somebody ask me, well, when are you going to retire? I said, well, when you're at the festival and you see these pictures of me coming across the field, you'll know I'm retired.
Which is a way of saying that just like George Wein, you plan to keep coming to this festival as long as you possibly can.
Yes.
All right, so he was the model. There you go. Well, good deal. Well, is there any other questions? Because we're just about out of time. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you, Quint. Thank you, Mr. Green. All the love, the respect, the festival energy. I think this is my 50th year attending the Jazz Festival. My mama used to bring us, when we would bring our ice chests in, I think Danny Walker, I was Camden Chad. I think Professor Long has so many others, but I've been blessed to work the festival too and have conversation with Mr. Wein. You know all the legacy we have. And I just wanted to say thank you. I love you. You commit to you. All you got to do is work the Jazz Festival with Benton.
There you go. Gene is a Montana, as in Tootie, Montana.
Yeah.
She's been an Indian queen. She's been a social aid and pleasure club. She's done everything in our culture.
Yeah, runs deep. All right. Anybody else here before we wrap up? Oh,
Right here? Comment.
go ahead.
I never thought I'd see anything better than Bruce Springsteen, and I think I just did.
Look at that, huh? Look at that. What a nice thing to say. Well, all right, so Quint, so are you going to be leading the Georgia parade today? You going to be out there for it?
I'm not in the parade. I'm at the unveil.
You'll be at the unveil.
I'll be speaking. But we'll have some music. We'll have some George-inspired jazz.
All right.
And then unveil.
All right.
What
Well,
time
very.
is that on and where? Exactly what time and where exactly?
All right, it's 2:25. It's at the back of Congo Square Field. Like you got the Congo Square stage. It's at Congo Road, we call it. At the end, just follow the Congo Field down to the road.
Okay.
And this George that we're unveiling is phenomenal. Yeah, thank you. Welcome to come, of course.
All right. Well, there you go, folks. Look for the signs of George Wein's face. And Quint, hopefully we won't see signs with your face on it anytime soon. So, there you go. All right. Thank you, guys.